Calling My Disabled Husband Novel Chapter 4 Don't Be Haughty. Amy returned to the Reed family in the afternoon, and as soon as she entered, she saw her sister, Jayla Reed, sitting on the sofa, holding a picture book in her hand and was sketching on it. Seeing her walk in, she rolled her eyes, and her voice sounded gloating. "I heard you have been the Hayden family. How is it? How does the Haydens treat you?" Although Jayla was gleeful to see what happened to Amy, she still wanted to maintain her politeness superficially. Amy raised her eyes and looked at her. Tone was gentle. "Pretty well. At least Camden was nice to her." Jayla observed Amy's expression and saw that she didn't look proud, so she felt relieved. She put the book aside and said, "Amy, in fact, it's not bad for you to marry Patrick Hayden. You are so obsessed with your job. How can a normal man bear it? But it is different when you marry him. You can do whatever you want, and it's all up to you." Amy didn't say anything. She had long been used to listening to Jayla's sarcastic remarks, and to her, it didn't hurt at all. She just waited quietly for what Jayla would say next. As usual, she wouldn't talk so much to her. There must be another purpose behind talking to her so patiently today. Sure enough, Jayla was lazy to beat about the bush with Amy, and she said directly, "Now that you have married into the Hayden family, their families are our family too. You also know that Global HIV Pictures is managed by Patrick Hayden's brother, Miles Hayden. I'm planning to act in a teleplay, and the role of the heroine is very suitable for me. We are relatives now. Amy, go and tell Miles Hayden to give me that role." Amy frowned slightly, and was shocked at Jayla for saying so in such a natural way. She pursed her lips and said after a while, "Jayla, I only saw Camden Hayden and Patrick Hayden just now. As for gentleman you mentioned, I may not have the opportunity to meet him." Even if she saw him, she didn't think she could talk to him. Jayla immediately became angry when she heard that she tried to reject her. "What's the matter with you? You haven't married yet, but you are already speaking for them. You need to figure it out. I'm your sister. Our family has raised you up to now, and you're just finding every excuse to refuse us when asked to do such a small thing. Do you want to be an ungrateful person?" Jayla stood up from the sofa, and the disguise of gentleness of her face had long been gone. "Let me tell you, Amy, you have to solve this for me. If you don't see Miles Hayden, you can go tell Camden Hayden. I don't believe Miles Hayden can still refuse when he's given an order." After speaking, Jayla went upstairs. Amy finally frowned. There was really nothing she could do about Jayla, who had always been egoistic. After staying in the living room for a while, Amy returned to her room. She found a very old suitcase, put some of her things in it, and left the Reed family. Originally, Amy did not plan to move to Hayden's mansion so soon, but she was so interested in the instruments in Patrick's room that she wished she could fly there with wings. However, she knew that Patrick didn't like her, and after she had settled her things, Amy sneaked into Patrick's room in the dark at 1 o'clock at night. She didn't make any noise, in order not to wake up the person on the bed with the sound of walking. Amy even took off her shoes and walked into the room barefoot. Amy stared at Patrick's face for a long time. Making sure that Patrick was asleep, she then walked to an instrument. The thick darkness in the room didn't affect her to keep doing it. This was her unknown talent. In the dark, her vision would not be affected in any way, and she could even read and write without any problems. Moreover, she didn't need to sleep for long hours every day. Basically, an hour or two was enough to restore her physically strength immediately. However, in order to survive better in the Reed family, Amy's talents, which were different from ordinary people's, were hidden very well. At this moment, Amy walked through Patrick's room as if walking in the light. She didn't touch any of the instruments, but carefully observed each of them, noting their functions and modes. Amy didn't stay in the room for too long. After all, it was the first time she'd ever entered Patrick's room. She was very careful not to wake him up. Fortunately, after Amy had finished observing all the instruments, she looked at Patrick again and found that he was still sleeping as peacefully as when she came in, and she was slightly relieved. Amy hesitated for a moment, but finally walked to the bedside and checked on Patrick. His complexion was very bad. In that sense, he really looked like a sick person. However, generally speaking, after lying down for such a long time, patients with hyperplegia will at least lose a lot of weight, even if they were not haggard. Patrick's body looked very muscular. Amy didn't think about it too much, just thinking that Camden spent a lot of money to provide nutrition for Patrick in order to maintain his physical condition. She couldn't help but think of the old man who was still worried about his grandson at this age. Sighing softly, Amy muttered in a low voice, "Don't be haughty because of being loved. Don't make Grandpa sad." And her grandpa cared for her a tenth of what Camden did for Patrick. She couldn't bear to hurt his feelings. When Amy left Patrick's room in the dark, Patrick, who was supposed to be sleeping on the bed, suddenly opened his eyes. His gaze swept coldly across the room, but in the darkness, he couldn't find anything abnormal. In fact, Patrick had already woken up when Amy came in. He could have said something to frighten her, but he didn't. He wanted to see what Amy wanted to do. What was the purpose of this woman whom Grandpa hired to be his wife, who was willing to stay, even if she was treated as a servant in the Hayden family? Instinctively, Patrick already regarded Amy as someone who would harm him. He even thought for a moment that if Amy had just attacked him, it would be fine, and if he died, everything would come to an end without bothering him anymore. Who would have thought that after waiting a long time, Amy didn't make any moves? She only approached him once just now, and she just told him not to be haughty. Patrick narrowed his eyes a little and really couldn't understand this woman. The voice of his assistant, Trace Short, came from his headset. "Mr. Hayden, do you want us to catch her?" "No, just have someone keep an eye on her," said Patrick. Chapter 5. Expect some changes. Trace had always obeyed Patrick's words, which was why he didn't take any action, even if he had found it out the first second Amy entered the room. As soon as Patrick woke up from the operation, a tiny earphone was implanted in his ear so that his assistants could listen to his orders at any time. They were like his brothers who had gone through so many difficult situations with Patrick at risk of their lives for more than 10 years. This time, after what had happened to Patrick, they all wanted an eye for an eye. However, Patrick had already ordered them. No matter what they saw in his room, they were not allowed to reveal themselves without his verbal order. But for this woman who sneaked into Patrick's room, even if it was the woman Camden had found to be his wife, Trace and the others were still hostile to her. Trace said, "Mr. Hayden, if you don't like her, I'll ask someone to kill her." Patrick frowned, and an inexplicable gloom welled up in his eyes. "This is a society that ruled by law, and we are civilized people," he said. Trace didn't make a sound anymore, but somehow felt a little strange. When Patrick dealt with enemies, he never reminded them to be civilized people. Trace, however, had already sensed a hint of danger, so he dared not speak any more nonsense, but only said, "Mr. Hayden, have a good rest." Patrick didn't say anything, but just stared at the ceiling. He really wanted to know what the woman's purpose was, who sent her here, and what relationship she had with the person who wanted him dead. Amy didn't know that Patrick had noticed what she was doing and regarded her as an object of suspicion. Back on her room, Amy immediately found a stack of white cardboard. She spread them on the floor and began to draw. She drew all the instruments according to her memory. It was the only solution she could work out. Amy couldn't operate the instruments in Patrick's room right away, because she hadn't seen Patrick's case yet, and she didn't know enough about these instruments. If she adjusted the buttons on the instruments recklessly, it could bring harm to Patrick's recovery. Therefore, Amy decided that before studying how these instruments worked, she would not try them herself, but would make a mini version by herself first. She had written down the functions of all the instruments tonight, and had also drawn the blueprints. After she got the materials tomorrow, she could make them by herself. Another talent of Amy was that she could accurately reproduce everything she had seen. Although she couldn't do research and invention, Amy was an expert in imitating. It was just a pity that, since she had been taken back to the Reed family, she had never had the chance to use this talent again. After drawing, it was already dawn. Amy folded the drawing and stuffed them into her school bag. This morning, she still had another operation, so she could only ask someone to buy the materials for her. So, Amy went out 2 hours earlier than the original time to go to work, turned into an alley near the hospital, and stopped at an ordinary breakfast shop. The owner of the breakfast shop was a woman in her 40s. Seeing her come in, she greeted enthusiastically, "Good morning, Amy. Bread and milk?" Amy nodded and sat by a table near the kitchen. She put her school bag on the ground and chatted with the boss as if nothing had happened. "Lydia, please put more cheese," Amy said. Lydia responded with a smile and brought the bread and milk over within a few minutes. Amy picked up the bread and took a bite. It was delicious as always. Having finished her breakfast and paid, Amy said to Lydia, "Lydia, I'll go through the back door to do some shopping." She usually entered and exited through the main entrance because it was not far from the gate of the hospital. Only occasionally, when going to a small supermarket behind to get some groceries, would Amy tell Lydia and go directly through the back door on the kitchen side. Otherwise, she would have to go a long way around a lot. Lydia said, "Okay. How many times have I said it? You don't need to tell me. For this kind of thing." Amy smiled, didn't stay any longer, and went into the kitchen. As she walked, she took out the drawing from her bag and there was a detailed list on it. Then she put the list in a cupboard in the kitchen. She didn't stop walking, and no time was wasted at all. Amy went to the supermarket and bought a packet of sugar, then went to the hospital. Everything was normal and natural, without any flaws. After hearing what Trace reported, Patrick felt more suspicious. Trace said, "Mr. Hayden, Miss Reed does go to that breakfast shop before every operation. So even though she had breakfast with your grandfather this morning, she just had a glass of milk and a bread. Maybe it's her way to cheer herself up." Patrick heard this and frowned deeper. "Maybe." His eyes fell on somewhere of the chandelier and his voice was cold. "Trace, when did you start using such guesswork to make judgment?" Through the screen, Trace could feel the displeasure of his boss, and he quickly said, "I'm sorry, Mr. Hayden. It's my fault." He had always known better than anyone else that Patrick hated this kind of speculation the most. Today, he really made a mistake. Patrick said, "Keep watching." "Yes," Trace responded. Amy's surgery today was very simple and was completed in only half an hour. She wasn't on duty today, and she wasn't originally asked to perform this operation either. It was just that something happened to a doctor's family and she was asked to help. After the operation, Amy left the hospital. She went directly to a shopping mall, and like every woman, she walked around and bought clothes and shoes she liked. After shopping for an afternoon, Amy got into a bathroom in the mall, changed the clothes and shoes she bought and the things someone put away there in advance, and then took a taxi back to Hayden's mansion. Coincidentally, Camden came out of Patrick's room and saw the bags Amy was carrying. So he casually asked, "Did you go shopping?" "Yes, Grandpa," said Amy. "Got some new clothes and expect some changes." Camden was not unhappy about this, and just said, "Can you go and see Pat in a while? I hope you can be the first one to reach out to him and you two can bond." Chapter 6. I will always have the opportunity to bully her. Camden knew his grandson's attitude, and it was impossible to expect him to accept Amy himself. The only thing that he could do by now was to let Amy go to Patrick's room more often and get to know him. After more communication, Patrick would be able to discover that Amy was a good girl. Maybe he would be able to rekindle his enthusiasm for life and actively cooperate with the treatment. Perhaps he, an old man, could still see his future great-grandson or great-daughter. Just thinking about it, Camden couldn't hide his excitement. Amy looked into Camden's shrewd and clear eyes, and was very dazed. How could she know that Camden had already thought of the names of her and Patrick's son and daughter? He even wanted to see his great-grandchildren get married. Amy said, "Grandpa, I'll go back and put away my things first, and I'll go see Mr. Hayden right away." "Okay, I'm waiting for you here." "I'll go with you," Camden stopped imagining and said happily. Amy hurried back to her room, hid her things, took out the clothes and shoes used as a cover, put them on the bed, and hurried over. Camden led Amy to Patrick's room and couldn't help but say to Amy, "Amy, Pat has been sick for a long time and is in a bad mood. He was indifferent to you yesterday. I apologize to you for him. I want to ask you a favor. No matter how he treats you today, don't be angry, okay?" "Grandpa, don't worry. I won't," Amy said. Living in the Reed family until now, she had long cultivated a temperament of unruffledness, and nothing would make her experience emotional ups and downs. What was more, as a doctor, she could better understand the patient's psychological state, so she wouldn't bother with Patrick. Hearing what Amy said, Camden felt relieved. He said, "Amy, you are a good girl. I like you very much and I also thank you very much. I will persuade Pat and ask him to treat you well." Amy responded, thinking of something. She stopped Camden, "Grandpa." She stopped in her tracks, feeling a little embarrassed. "What's wrong?" Camden wondered. This was the first time Amy had such a look. He said, "Amy, if you have anything to say, you can tell me directly. I will stand by your side." Amy felt warm when she heard the words, as if a warm current had been injected into her whole body. This was the first time she had heard a family member say that. She bit her lip and finally said, "Grandpa, I don't know why we two families connect through marriages. Since I am now marrying then, I hope you can promise me one thing." "Just say it," said Camden. "Grandpa, I hope that no matter what the Reed family asks from Hayden family, the Hayden family will refuse." Amy looked at Camden with a firm and determined look, and said, "I don't want the Hayden family to be entangled by leeches." Camden looked at Amy for a long time and was not in a hurry to speak. After Amy finished speaking, she didn't say anything more. She didn't even explain to Camden why she said it. No one knew how long it took before Camden said, "Amy, thank you for treating me as family." Amy's eyes turned red and she finally relaxed. There was no need to say anything else. It was self-evident. Camden granted her request. Amy said, "Thank you, Grandpa." The corners of her mouth curled up slightly. With a faint smile, her eyes were clear, showing the purest appearance. Camden sighed silently. Mason's lifetime of cleverness was interrupted by moments of stupidity. Amy was such a good granddaughter, but he didn't care or love her. In the room, although Patrick couldn't see it, he could already hear the conversation between Camden and Amy clearly in the earphone. The bottom of his eyes became deeper and deeper, and no one could know what he was thinking. Trace, who was hiding in the dark, didn't dare to speak out, only wondering why Amy could be so ruthless that she cut off the Reed family's route of retreat on the second day. However, he was clear about the character of the people in the Reed family. It was no exaggeration for Amy to describe them with leeches. Thinking about it this way, she was really considerate for the Hayden family. Trace, however, didn't understand why Amy behaved like this. He wouldn't be so stupid as to think that Amy had a crush on Patrick. The moment Camden led Amy into the room, she felt a sharp gaze looking toward her. Different from yesterday's indifference, today, with strong scrutiny and inquiry, it made Amy flustered for a moment and feel guilty. Fortunately, Patrick quickly looked away, looked at Camden, and asked, "Grandpa, is there anything else?" "Amy just came back from work, so I accompany her to see you again, in case you will bully her while I'm away," Camden said. Patrick snorted lightly and didn't reveal that Amy just came back after going shopping all afternoon and having fun all afternoon. He just said to Camden, "Grandpa, then you have to be careful. It's best to come with her every time. Otherwise, I will always have a chance to bully her." Amy's heart skipped a beat, and she looked at Patrick. The feeling of guilt was even stronger. Why did she feel that Patrick was saying that it was better to keep an eye on her at night? Otherwise, he couldn't guarantee that he wouldn't do something. Coincidentally, Patrick was also looking at her, and the moment their eyes met, Amy clearly saw a hint of mockery in Patrick's eyes. She pressed her lips and moved silently, blocking herself with Camden. Camden glared at Patrick, pretending to be angry. "What kind of nonsense are you talking about? She's your wife. You are not allowed to think of bullying her." Patrick didn't make a sound, but somehow thought of a different way of bullying. His eyes suddenly turned cold. What the hell was he thinking? Camden saw Patrick ignored him, so he didn't continue to talk about this topic. Instead, he helped Amy show her presence in front of Patrick with nothing to say, and he just took Amy to stay in Patrick's room for hours. Until Patrick yawned and said to them, "Grandpa, I'm sleepy. I'm going to sleep." Only then did Camden let Patrick rest and lead Amy away. As soon as they came out of the room, Camden said, "Amy, we have made progress today. That's it. I will accompany you to chat with Pat every day, so that he can get used to you sooner.